Thanks very much, everyone, and particularly for giving me Friday afternoon, which is always that precious time of the week that you get to catch up. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, and given that we're focusing on a world without bullying, wouldn't it be great to have a world without bullying, violence and racism, and the actions that we can take in a school environment that make a huge difference to affect that. So I have been a little provocative because I've got quite a different presentation for you today, and I would like to really sort of flip the way that we think about bullying and the approach, because I think at the moment there's this kind of heightened anxiety about bullying. Many other really serious and sad outcomes that have happened this year have kind of raised the media's attention to this issue and often distorted our understanding of what we should be doing and the best ways to support young people. And a lot of people are now putting bullying and suicide together and saying, well, if a child's bullied, one of the likely outcomes is that they'll suicide. And I guess I would really like to sort of cool the jets to say that suicide is a really complex outcome, and bullying certainly doesn't help. But there is no evidence to show that there is a direct line from only being bullied to an outcome of suicide. Of course, children who are bullied, there are other reasons why they're bullied. There are a multitude of factors, which means we've got a whole variety of ways to intervene. So sadly, people want sort of the one solution, cookie cutter. If we just address bullying, that'll fix everything. Actually, I'd like to argue, if you just address friendliness and the ways people engage with each other, you fix everything. So hence my title, which is, what if the harm from bullying is a hoax? Maybe it doesn't hurt people, and we do all this stuff to help people get along better. Will the world be a better place as a result of it? So even if bullying wasn't an issue for us, the best way to reduce bullying is the best way to improve outcomes for children academically, socially, emotionally. So really I'd like to start from that pretext, and really the research that we've done over the last 20 years has focused on that as our outcome. You might recall the program we've been testing for 20 years with a huge number of studies, as we'll see in a moment, is called Friendly Schools. It's not called, even though people say, oh, Donna, you're the person who does the bullying research, not even bullying prevention research, but bullying research. So I know the best ways to bully. The Friendly Schools program is really about what we determined were the most important outcomes that make the greatest amount of difference for children's social engagement, improving the likelihood of them having great levels of social competence, having ways to regulate their emotions so that they're friendly and people want to be around them. No one likes to be around someone who's always, who have difficulty regulating their emotions. So this is about helping children to be calm, helping children to connect, helping children to develop other skills like perseverance and enthusiasm, the sorts of skills that we know help children to be successful in school. So if we're going to address bullying, we have to address it through the ways that we know children learn best, and I'd like to argue today what that might look like. So my brief was, Donna asked the group to imagine what the world would look like without bullying. So I've decided our world today is going to be schools. Imagine what schools would look like if there was no bullying. And therefore, what would we need to do to make the small changes? So today I'm going to show you lots of really practical small steps. So I don't want you to sort of come out of this session, I hope, that's my goal, that you're going, oh my goodness, it's just too hard, I don't even know where to start. And I think often because it's a complex problem, when people look at the research that talks about the actions that you should take, it becomes overwhelming. It looks like it's just too hard from the outset. So I've picked the pearls out of our research to say if you just do these things, and even if you just do one or two of them, this year, that's your focus. In fact, I'd love, while you're still awake, I know I'll lose you, when I present for an hour, by the way, 7 minutes of it you'll remember. 7 minutes of it, which is pretty scary. So I'll highlight those 7 minutes moments for you. But probably the most important issue that I'd like to stress today is that if we just got every staff member in a school every time they're on duty to learn the names of 2 more children that they didn't know the last time and learn something about those children. So ideally something about them that other people don't necessarily know. Maybe they're great at football, but no one knows they also play the violin. So that each time you see that child, you're banking credit. You're building that social relationship and have that credit. So when things get messy, as inevitably children have all sorts of challenges during their school life, you've got that credit to draw down on. So I'd like to argue, if you forget everything else, if we just encourage teachers to do everything in their power to get to know as many students as possible and know them well and use it well, then we will make a huge difference in reducing bullying. will make a huge difference in improving children's mental and emotional health because they'll feel connected, they'll feel less lonely, they'll see great modelling. Because of course you're very significant adults who model social behaviour, so when you demonstrate it, so they learn as well. And particularly because a lot of their social behaviour is confounded by technology these days, they're not watching adults' faces the way, or other friends' faces the way that they were historically, so they're losing the ability to process social information. So when children are on the spectrum, as we know, they have difficulty reading a face, knowing what that face means. We're starting to see in our data that children are not being able to pick up the nuances of a face, saying, Donna, move on to the next slide, but watching for those changes. So we may have to teach it much more deliberately than we've ever done before, where we've assumed that children will just observe that in their environment. So my job, imagine a world without bullying. And what would that world look like? It would look like a world where people were relating really well to each other and some of the benefits that are associated with that. But before I start, we need to remind ourselves of the magnitude of it if we get it wrong. So in our world without bullying, if we gathered up every child today who was bullied and we put them in one place, then all the children who are back in the schools weren't bullied today. We would have a world without bullying with those children. But all of those children, just over 100,000 if we extrapolate the data that we have, is how many children will be bullied today who would report that they were bullied today. So I'm showing you the MCG. I wish I could show the Optus Stadium. I wasn't exactly sure how many seats there were in there, but anyway, I've got the MCG. And I'm told that actually they don't even have 100,000 seats anymore because the average Australian bottom has got bigger. And so therefore they've had to take out a few seats to make bigger seats. And so there'd be a bit of a line outside the stadium to reach our 100,000. But that's enormous. And if you just think, you looked at that crowd, that's how many children would experience something that would be defined as bullying. So we always, when we're collecting data, we ask the kids to understand what we mean by bullying. So it's not just rough or aggressive behaviour, it needs to be intentional. So they sense that the person is doing it deliberately. There's no such thing as accidental bullying. It needs to be repeated, so they're doing it again and again. Might not be the next day, but they're continually identifying that person, and they're doing it with more power. So that power might be their age, it might be their size, it might be their gender, it might be that they're anonymous online. So that power comes in all sorts of ways. And typically they're the three components that we use to define bullying. So when you reflect on your policies that you have within the school, how have you defined bullying within your school? Because with its heightened attention, every child, I imagine, is coming to you and talking about the fact that they've been bullied without really, perhaps they've had some very unpleasant behaviour happening to them, but not necessarily bullying. So defining it really well, what's bullying and what's not, and being clear in our policies about what we expect children to do. So writing your policies with a behavioural expectation is how we would create a world without bullying versus just talking about how we'll manage it when it happens. So what would we expect the community to do, the community of students to do if they saw bullying, rather than what will we do when we see bullying? We'll treat it in whatever way the school has decided is appropriate or the system has decided. So taking action is really important. So if there's 100,000 children, that means that about 50% of children report they were bullied at least once last term. And that's across Australia. WA is a little bit lower than New South Wales, for example, and that's controlling for the size of the population because obviously there are more kids in New South Wales, nearly a third of children in Australia, so we weight the data so we can so they're comparable. So we're doing about the same as everybody else, but 50% of children report they were bullied at least once last term. 25% of children, so half of that 50%, say they were bullied at least once recently. So we would define that as frequent, something that's happened every few weeks or more often is what we would call chronic victimisation. And the children who tell us that they bully, so about 20% of children are prepared to tell us that they bully. So you have to wonder, it's a self-report survey, so of course there's always error. And of that 20%, about 10% tell us that they do it very regularly. And again, we know it's higher through our observational studies, but it's interesting the children who would tell us that they are engaging in that behaviour. We don't just say, do you bully or don't you? We ask about all the behaviours that children tell us look like bullying. So we describe those behaviours and we call that forms of bullying. So we don't use the word bullying in that description, and then we compare when children say, do I bully or not? And then we ask them about all these behaviours. Do you engage in these behaviours or not? And children tell us a lot more about their bullying behaviour, and at higher rates when we just describe the behaviour versus saying whether or not they bully, So obviously there's a social desirability bias that they don't want to talk about someone who's associated with bullying, not surprising. So a lot of kids are engaged in this behaviour, and a lot of people are experiencing it at least some point in their life. Does anyone know when more children experience bullying than any other time in their life? At what age? Oh, well done, you're really close. Yeah, 9 or 10. So if you're in a primary environment, more children bully and more children are bullied in every state in Australia and pretty much all around the world when we compare our data than any other age. So if we were going to do something to have a world without bullying, we'd have to be doing it way before age 10, which means our early years interventions, the work that we're doing with children to help them develop the right social emotional skills through play, through cooperation, helping them to build friendship groups, helping them to regulate their emotions, all of those are fundamental to us minimising or ameliorating the amount of bullying that's happening at around age 10. And then it dips again, so it goes up to those levels that I've just described at around age 10, and then it drops down again and it goes up again. What age does it go up again? It doesn't go as high as 10-year-olds.
It's 12-year-olds, year 7.
Yeah, well done. Yeah, first year it's transition. So the first one is developmental, so kids, just the ways they interact with other children, and the second one is caused by our structural changes. So we had a really interesting study some years ago, 2009, we collected data across Australia, and in those days our students were still in primary school in year 7, and obviously in New South Wales and other states, year 7s were in high school. There was a 25% increase in bullying rates if you were year 7 in a high school environment versus in a primary school environment. And when our year 7s went into high school in year 8, again, the rates went up. Actually didn't go as high as 25%. So there is a slight protective effect of being in primary school when you're a little bit younger and you're still developing social skills. But that's a change we have made, and if we could design schools again, and it's too hard to do this, and I would never even begin to suggest it, Lindsay, but we transitioning children right in the middle of adolescence is probably the worst time we could even think about doing that. But every transition point is a tough one for kids because we muck up their friendship groups. Kids have really tight social hierarchies. They know exactly where they sit, even though we'd like to think that they don't. They know who's above them, who's below them, and everyone in between. And when we move them into high school, we break up those friendship groups, and it's the new friendship groups that they form that take a little bit of sort of forming and storming until the people who were on the top of the pile before have reasserted themselves, and so it goes on. If you've ever taught in a school that takes on new streams of students during primary school, maybe a second stream in year 6 or year 5, you have the same problem because you're disrupting the friendship groups. So everything, again, is related to the way children get along with each other. So all the work that you might do at transition in preparing kids to go to high school, and then in the first years of high school, where you're helping them to connect with new friends and you're mixing them up with vertical relationship building as well as horizontal, meaning within their year group, makes a huge difference. So the actions that we can take to reduce bullying are first to understand where it peaks and intervene as much as we can before then, prior to age 10, prior to the movement to high school, so that we can create environments that help children to get along with each other again. So it's always about social competence, helping the lonely child, providing places the lonely child can sit with other lonely children in the hope that that might help them make friends. A lonely child is a prime target. When you ask children who bully, we've just finished a very large study called Beyond Bullying, where we only worked with children who are chronically engaged in bullying, and they profiled their target as someone who is alone, someone who's not as popular as other children, so there's less of a bystander uprising. And the third feature, there were many features, but the third major feature will break your heart. They said they look for a child who's not popular with teachers, because the teachers are less likely to notice. So we've got this challenge of helping young people to bring together so we can have this stadium empty with our world without bullying.